Hey, everybody. Grab those blue books. And the West Lafayette ordered some of the best song leaders in the Apostolic Church to come and lead, but they couldn't make it, so then they got us. So let's go to 37. Should nothing of our efforts stand, no legacy survive, unless the Lord does raise the house, in vain its builders strive. To you who boast tomorrow's gain, tell me, what is your life? A mist that vanishes at dawn, all glory be to Christ. All glory be to Christ our King. All glory be to Christ. His rule and reign will ever sing. All glory be to Christ. Verse 3. When on the day the great I am, the faithful and the true, the Lamb who was for sinners slain is making all things new. Behold, our God shall live with us and be our steadfast light, and we shall ere his people be. All glory be to Christ. A little bit louder. All glory be to Christ our King. All glory be to Christ. His rule and reign will ever sing. All glory be to Christ. Good job.
How about you? I feel like they kind of led us. You guys are amazing. I love the volume and energy. Number 34. Who has held the oceans in his hands? Who has numbered every grain of sand? Kings and nations tremble at his voice. All creation rises to rejoice. Behold our God, seated on his throne. Come, let us adore him. Behold our King. Nothing can compare. Come, let us adore him. Who has given counsel
That'll be all for now, but wow, you guys are good singers. So the theme that we have for this weekend is everything that has breath, praise the Lord. And so those of you that have seen the t-shirts, those are connected with our speakers here tonight. So we are glad to have Jay and Jackie Breaker from our church in Roanoke, Illinois. And they will be sharing with us their testimony of just God's graciousness for them. And as I look out at you guys, I think back to when I was your age, and I think I was probably more advanced than most of you. I think I had most of life figured out when I was, your age, a senior in high school. But that can all change really, really fast. And oftentimes we learn that we do not have it all figured out. When I think back to my senior year, we'll be going down to Harrison High School. That's where I gave my life to Christ. And we will not actually be able to be on the exact basketball court, but that's where my journey started. So you guys are in the right place right now. I'm glad that each of you are here, and I'm glad that we have Jay and Jackie here to share their story. And so we'll turn it over to you guys.
Thank you for having us. And to help make a few more connections, I'm going to give a shout out quick to my nieces and nephews, Cade, Tess, and Bree Lehman. They said they have lots of friends in the crowd. I'm hearing some O's from over here. So yeah, Amber Lehman, Tim Lehman, she was a Heimer from Taylor. That is my sister, so kind of help put a place where we are. And so yeah, we have 4 boys, and we've been married. Today is our 261-month anniversary. So I know you're not in school yet, so I won't make you do the math. It's a little under 22 years. And adventure has always been part of our story. For the first 8 years of marriage, we did not have children. And so we would scrimp and save every last penny to take adventures around the world. So whether we were whitewater rafting the Nile with crocodiles, to where they literally say when the rapids stop, you have to be in the boat because the crocs are waiting in the calm part to eat you, like that was reality at one point for us. Or whether we were paragliding off a mountain in Switzerland, also a highlight of our life. Whether we were in the Zambezi River, doing a bungee swing across the Zambezi River, another trip to Africa that we took. We have always loved adventure. And one of the things on our bucket list was scuba diving. But unfortunately, we didn't get that done in time once we started having kids. So it had always been on our bucket list, and one of our friends approached us and said that he had taken the courses and he really thought we would enjoy it. And so almost 3 years ago, it would be 3 years 3 years ago this summer, we started our scuba certification. So that's kind of the timeline. Oh.
So we took a lot of the classes were just local, and some of them were in the backyard pool of some people that the instructors knew. But this last trip was Labor Day. We went down to Bull Shoals, Arkansas, and we rented a houseboat. They had it all set up. We were gonna spend the whole weekend down there, and it was kind of a unique opportunity because you stay on the houseboat the whole time. So you sleep there, you eat there, you dive, you just go off the back of the boat, and then you come back on once you're done. And here's a picture of the houseboat that we were going to be staying on for the 3 days, okay? And so this was going to finish our dives, and then we would be certified to go up to 60 feet down on our own, okay? So that was the plan. There was going to be 10 of us on that boat for the weekend. There was a pre-teenage girl, and Jackie were the only females on the boat. The rest of us were for guys. And we luckily were the only married couple, and so we were able to get this penthouse suite up in the top of the boat. We had it to ourselves. It was about 7 foot by 7 foot by about 3 foot. But we had climbed up the ladder, and we were able to scatter our stuff out and kind of to sleep up there at night. So we had done multiple dives. We got down there on a Friday, kind of just got situated, and then Saturday we had done some of these, the skills that they were going to teach us. So they'd take turns. We would go out. Our instructor would go over a different skill that he wanted to teach us. We had went down to about 30 feet that day, and kind of then we eat supper and whatnot. So then Sunday was going to be our final day and going to be our final dive. Sunday afternoon, kind of our last thing, we get to plan our own dive. So we come up with the plan, and then we share that with them as far as here's what we're going to do. We're going to be gone for 44 minutes. We're going to go down to 60 feet. That way, if they keep track and something happens, if we're not back, they know something went wrong. So that was the plan on Sunday afternoon. So like I said, we had done a lot of the training and stuff back home, and every time we would get done, we would forget to get a picture together. We wanted to get a picture that looked like we were scuba diving, right? So we finally got a picture. We remembered to get a picture. We remembered to get a picture in our scuba gear. And this picture is really special because this is right before we go off for that last final dive. And so when I look at it from my standpoint now today, I look at that picture and those two people there didn't know what was about to happen. Okay? We have smiles on our face. We're on our final dive. We're kind of on a short vacation trip on a weekend. We didn't know what was about to happen, but God did. Okay, and He's obviously a big part of the story that we're going to tell. So that picture was about 3:30 on Sunday afternoon, and after we took that, we jumped in the water. So one thing is as we were going. On Saturday, it was pretty cloudy. We couldn't see too well. So Sunday was a lot clearer. But we had found during that if we would hold on to each other, then we didn't have to be looking and trying to find each other. We could focus on the scuba diving because we're just learning. So we found that to be helpful. We slowly made it down to our 60 feet. The houseboat was attached to the shore, and we could kind of follow the land down as it went underwater. We could kind of follow it down. If you're not careful, you can kind of get disoriented. So we kind of went down. We got down to our 60 feet. Of course, we have air tanks, and we have gauges that are telling us how deep we are, and all that kind of thing. And so we followed it down. We got down to 60 feet, and there wasn't a lot to see. We're in a lake. It's not like we're in the blue waters of the Caribbean or something. We were just in a lake. So there wasn't a lot to see, so we decided to go up. So we started back, and you have to go up and go slowly and stop and let your body kind of adjust and then continue up. So we had done that. We got back to about 15 or 20 feet, and we kind of stopped there, and then we decided, I think we had a little bit of time left, and so we're like, well, do you want to keep swimming or do you want to go up? Because obviously you can't talk when you're scuba diving. You have a regulator in your mouth so you can breathe, right? So we decided we were going to go up. And so Jackie, she went up, and I didn't go up. She got to the top, and I never came up. And so luckily, it was clearer than it had been, and she kind of lowered herself back down, and she could see me down there around that 15 feet or so, and my regulator was out of my mouth, and I was kind of just floating there. We're wearing a BCD vest. Essentially, you can fill it with air or take air out, helps you go up or down in the water. So luckily, I was just kind of floating there. My regulator was out, and so she dropped back down and came down and got me, grabbed onto me, pushed essentially filled the vest with air, so took us to the top. So we get to the top, and she asked if I'm okay, and I said no, and she said, what happened? And I said, I blacked out. And all I remember is I thought I had got to the top, but I remember kind of spinning, and then I blacked out, and I went unresponsive.
So at this point, I just laid Jay flat along the water, and I heard behind me, "Is everything okay?" And I turned to my right, and there at the houseboat, roughly around 50 yards away, were 4 men in the water. And later to talk to them, like, this is God's timing. We could not have orchestrated this timing even if we would have tried. So unbeknownst to me, one of the gentlemen later told me that he watched, like, they ascended, they came up, and then he watched me come up. He watched me go down, he watched me bring Jay up, and then he yelled at me. It was that quick of timing. So these 4 gentlemen in the water yelled if everything is okay, and so I yelled back to them, "No, Jay passed out." So immediately they started sprinting as fast as they could to get to Jay. Another blessing of the day is that 2 gentlemen had decided not to go out. So they were in street clothes, and they happened to be like at the back of the boat, ready when these 4 guys had come up. So they were still dressed in their street clothes, and so at this point, you learn different techniques to basically push someone back to the boat. So I was already doing that, but they came to my rescue and they started taking Jay's body back to the boat. And at this point, my assumption was he passed out, he just needs some time, everything's gonna be okay. So I'm leisurely just kicking back to the boat, laying on my back, and I turn to check my proximity to the boat, and it's right then that I know everything is not okay. I see them try to hoist Jay's body out of the water. And as a nurse, I know that, like, if you take any person and try to pick them up, they're gonna be a U-shaped noodle. Unfortunately, Jay's body was completely flat as a board as they were trying to get him out of the water. And so immediately then I started heading back much quicker. By the time I got back to the houseboat, they had already stripped Jay of his gear as much as they could possibly take off of him. And I observed 3 grown gentlemen just trying to pry Jay's fingers open. He was so clenched tight, so stiff, like literally stiff as a board, and they were trying to pry his fingers open to get his flashlight off. At that point, the gentlemen transferred, the 2 in the street clothes, transferred Jay's body to the well of our speedboat. Not our speedboat, the marina speedboat. The speedboat is what we had used. We would take it to go get groceries, fill our oxygen tanks, so it was parked right next to the houseboat. So at this time, guys are helping me strip me of my gear. At that point, I just had on a wetsuit still. And it was decided at that point that myself, Jay, our best friend Matt, and then 3 other gentlemen would all take the 15-minute trek to the marina. So at this point, I laid down beside Jay. He was still completely unresponsive. I was taking his radial pulse. Matt was holding his head, checking for breaths. 1 man was driving, 1 man was calling 911 in the marina, and the other man was just assisting however he could. So at this point as a nurse, I was finally able to fully assess Jay. I found him to be completely paralyzed, his stiff body, clenched hands. He had a fixed gaze, pinpoint pupils. He would not respond to anything. Anytime I tried to do painful stimulation to his chest, no response. He was unable to speak. At the time, we didn't know, but he was unable to see. He was completely blind. His breathing was immensely, immensely labored. That was Matt's job. I was checking his pulse to see if he was still alive, and Matt would be watching his breaths. So our friend Matt, holding his head, he would say, "Jack, Jay, quit breathing." And so I would take Jay's chest and I'd shake him, and his body was so immensely stiff. And so I would turn his head as much as I could to mine as I was laying beside him. And I would look him eye to eye, and I would plead with him, "Baby, one more breath. Just give me one more breath." And slowly and surely, not knowing if he could hear me, not knowing if anything was catching, I would see his jaw. That's all that would move, is just a little part of his jaw would just start to tremor. And he would just take a short little breath, and that little breath would then just start turning into tiny little breaths, and then would stop. And this cycle continued for the 15-minute boat ride. Matt would say, "Jack, he quit breathing." So I'd shake his chest. "Baby, just give me one more breath. That's all I need, Jay, just one." And that cycle repeated. So not knowing, sorry.
So once I was in the bottom of that boat on the way back, like I said, I couldn't see anything, I couldn't move, but I could hear. For whatever reason, I could hear a little bit what was going on, but I wasn't able to move or convey anything back to them. But it was kind of all a big blur to me. I felt really tight. I could feel my back, getting really tight. My muscles were all clenched. And the breathing was really hard. I remember having to, I was sucking through a straw that's got the end pinched off. Like I could barely, it was just a lot of work to get a breath. But I remember the boat, hitting the waves on that 15-minute ride in. And it was a busy weekend because it was Labor Day.
So essentially, Jay's whole body was starting to shut down. We were able to speak with a brain and spinal cord specialist later, and she just kept saying, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So with everything shutting down, consciousness should have shut down, hearing should have shut down, his other senses were shutting down. And I just stood back and marveled after the fact. Without consciousness and without hearing, I don't know if we would have been able to convey to Jay and he would have understand how important it was for him to breathe in that moment. So I really feel like those are two of the many miracles that God gave us. We didn't know if our calls were getting through to the marina. It kept dropping, was quite patchy, and unbeknownst to us, previous in the day, with it being a busy Labor Day weekend, there had been an accident with a child. So the marina's resources were already gone and not returned yet. The Bull Shoals ambulance, which was the town that was closest, was already being used to transport that child. So knowing that they were going to now have to get an ambulance from 22 minutes away instead of local, and knowing that from what they thought our calls were coming through between the breaking up, they knew that we were part of the group that was scuba diving, and they assumed that it was a drowning. So knowing that, they went ahead and made the decision to call Lafayette, and we're so thankful that they did. At this time, we made it back to the marina, and I remember at that time laying in the well of the boat. I didn't have my cell phone on me. We had grabbed Jay's. It was there on the table, but his facial recognition, his face was contorting funny, and it didn't look like him, and so we were trying to use the facial recognition of the phone. Wasn't working. We were trying to pry his thumb apart, away from his clenched hand to try to do a thumbprint recognition. That didn't work. My cell phone was still back at the houseboat, so Matt did have his cell phone on him, our dear friend Matt. And so I remember telling him, we need to get the prayer chain started. And so he's like, okay, give me a number and I'll get that going. And so I remember trying to think of my dad's phone number. Okay, we don't remember phone numbers, we don't take the time to memorize phone numbers anymore. So I remember spouting off a number, and he dialed it, and he's like, yeah, that one doesn't even exist, So he's like, okay, I need a number. And so I remember curling into a ball right beside Jay, and I remember praying, God, we need prayers. Jay's hanging on by a thread. We need the prayers of those we love. We need your body praying. And I remember sitting up, and a number came to my head, and I gave it to him. Unbeknownst to me, it was my brother's cell phone number, which was my high school phone that I had used. He didn't answer, obviously being an unrecognized number. So Matt's solution was just give me another number. Well, that one was hard enough to come up with. So I remember curling in a ball again right beside Jay. And I remember this time praying audibly out loud, God, we need prayer. We need prayer. I just need, please, just implant in my brain one number. Try to give me someone's number. And so a number came to my mind, and Matt dialed it, and he got my dad's voicemail. So my dad is Kent Heimer from Taylor, Missouri, to help make some connections. So he got my dad's voicemail, and so I told him, I said, just keep calling. Right now he's at a funeral in Fairbury Forest. Just keep calling. So that was Matt's job, to try to make those connections. And finally, he was able to get through to my dad, and we got the Roanoke prayer chains going with Matt calling his mom. And so thankful for those prayer chains. In times of tragedy, we all react different. One of the gentlemen, he was actually the driver of the boat. I remember he just did not speak. He was in shock. And I remember when we got there was a lot of chaos going around, and he just got out of the boat, and he just went and stood by the marina, and he just stood there. And through getting to know people over these 2 days, I could tell by his countenance, by his disposition, that he was a believer. And so I called him by name, and I said, look at me. He didn't even want to look at the scenario. He just wanted the scenario to go away. And I told him to look at me. And I said, can you pray? And he just nodded yes. And I told him, the effectual fervent of prayer of a righteous man availeth, anyone know the last word? Much. Yes, the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. I said, your only job, I told him, is to pray. Can you do that? He said, yes. So I guess I want to ask you guys the question, just to ponder in your heart, as you're getting ready to go back to school, is your countenance such, is your disposition such, where people can see, for those of you who've asked Jesus into your heart, can people see that change in your life just by your actions? Would people in a tragedy, in a situation, be able to call upon you to pray? I hope that is the case, because I was sure thankful for the prayers, knowing that that one gentleman at the time, I knew that from now until when, his only job was to pray. So I hope people can count on you also to pray. So by this time, the ambulance had arrived, and man, did I feel sorry for them. They seemed very overwhelmed. At one moment they would say, he needs oxygen, and then he'd be like, but should he have oxygen? So then they'd take it off. Oh, he needs more oxygen. Oh, he needs less. Like, they just didn't know what to do because the case was so complex. And so I remember at one point they were discussing how to get Jay loaded onto the stretcher. So they were finagling with the body board, and I told them, I said, his body is a body board. Like, he is stiffer than all get out. Like, just pick him up. And so sure enough, the three of them just picked him straight up and just set him on the stretcher. So now that he's loaded in the stretcher, they are running down by the Bull Shoals Marina there at the walkway. I'm running behind. And there at the very front of the marina, there are lots of people, busy weekend. We had kind of gathered a crowd of watchers. And there by the fish feeder there was a group of about 20 or 30 people. And I remember looking at them off to my right as I ran past, and I yelled back at them, if you are praying people, please pray. And multiple of them shouted back, we already are. I was so thankful for the body of Christ. I remember one gentleman yelled, what's his name? And I said, my husband is Jay. And they said, we're praying for Jay. And so at that point, it was already told to me that I would be able to ride in the ambulance up to the helipad, which was located at the grocery store. And so I situated myself in the front seat, and there were the three of them working on Jay in the back. And all of a sudden I hear hooping and hollering, things such as, oh my goodness, they never come to us, this is so exciting, that kind of thing. So I look off to my right, and sure enough, a police escort is bringing Life Flight down to us. So at this time, Life Flight comes, there's three of them. They go to the back, they start assessing Jay. And one of the ladies come up to me and she says, at this point you're not going to be able to ride along. With 6 of us, it's going to be full, and you're going to need to step out now. But she said, we had a plan to take Jay a certain place, but now with weather, we're going to have to take him to Mercy Hospital in Springfield, Illinois. So she's like, or Springfield, what? Missouri, sorry. Springfield, Missouri. We're from Illinois. So she said, it's going to take you roughly 2.5 hours or so you need to get going. We're obviously going to have a much shorter flight. And so at that point, once they said I can no longer go, I step out, and through the little side door, I see them all working on Jay. And they had told me I couldn't go in there. I'm not telling you to disobey, but I just needed one more kiss. I needed to tell him bye. And so I pushed my way through, went up that little side door, and I pushed my way through. And I planted a kiss on his forehead, and I told him I loved him. And as I was hurrying out, I heard him moan. Previous to this, the only signs of life that we had were a thready pulse and labored breathing. So finally a sound. God gave me a sound. And so the Life Flight nurse said, Jay, is anything hurting? And he responded, body aches. Like it was just a whisper, but I heard it. And so I was so thankful that God gave me those 2 words to hold on to as hope, that maybe, there was a different outcome than my brain was analyzing. A decision was made that we needed to go, or that the men would go back to the houseboat. We didn't have my cell phone. We didn't have keys to any vehicles. We didn't have clothes. So they left me there at the marina, and they headed back on the houseboat. And so at this point, all I'm wearing is still my wetsuit and a swimming suit underneath it, so I had nothing. And so I went into the marina, and I just quickly spouted off about how my husband was just life-flighted. I have no clothes. I'm stealing some clothes, but I promise I'll pay you back at some point. They didn't know how to respond. They just, okay. So I helped myself to some merchandise because I had no money. I did pay them back much later, but yes, I did. And so I was able to take a shirt. And then at that point, I just went and I sat on that little bench there at the front by the fish feeder. And as I sat there, it was the longest 30 minutes of my life, and it was the hardest moments of my life. Over the tops of those trees, I could see the helicopter finally take off, and Jay felt so far away. But in those moments, the body of Christ just enveloped me. They could see me hurting. Multiple times, groups of people would come and they would pray over me. Husband and wife prayed over me. I remember walking to the bathroom, and a husband and wife stopped me, and they prayed with me. Also, another lady stopped me on my way to the bathroom, and she said, "How are you so calm?" And I remember looking at her, and I told her, I said, "Live or die." I said, "God is holding us both." And her response to that was, "Be optimistic. Everything is going to be okay." And I remember as I headed off to the bathroom then, I remember thinking, there is no guarantee that everything is going to be okay. I would never want to wish tragedy on any of you guys. But one thing that Satan or no one else can take away is that peace. The peace that passes all what? Understanding. Yes, God gave me such a peace in those moments that was Holy Spirit, just so thankful. Like I was so thankful that I could, be a testimony to him of him. And I wish for you someday that peace, but not if it means tragedy on you. But it's something that no one can ever take away, just to know that God is that close and with me in those moments.
So, as you can tell from a lot of this story, all I was doing was nothing, right? So she's the one that's happened to do all this, see all this. So, so anyway, so I had that 38-minute flight to Mercy Hospital in Springfield. So I still couldn't see. It's hard to breathe. It had been about 45 minutes at this point. I remember when the helicopter took off, they put earmuffs on they told me they were going to put earmuffs on my ears, and I remember the helicopter taking off. And I remember it was kind of an interesting thing. At that point, that was the only connection I had to reality was my hearing. I could only hear once in a while, and a lot of the story of this, I don't remember. So when they put those earmuffs on my ears, I now had no connection to reality, which was kind of just a different thing. I couldn't see, I couldn't hear. All my senses essentially were gone. And so at some point, I couldn't do anything. I do remember I got my voice back and I started yelling and asked, what am I supposed to be doing? Because I really didn't know what was going on. And so I was yelling, and they finally said, "Shh, we're right here, quit yelling, you're okay." And I'm like, "Well, what am I supposed to do?" Because I couldn't tell. And they're like, "Your only job is to breathe. Like, that's all you have to do." They were taking care of it. And at some point, which I don't remember this, but we had pulled my medical records later, and I found out that on that helicopter flight, I must have gained movement again. Because the medical records just stated, patient became combative. So I figured I had been stiff and couldn't move for 45 minutes, so once I got it, I must have came out swinging. But that doesn't work too well when the people are trying to take care of you. So they hit me with about 4 doses of Versed, essentially to knock me back out. So
at this point, I had a 2.5-hour car ride to the hospital. I remember receiving a phone call shortly after we had taken off, because at that point I'd been sitting at the marina for roughly 30 minutes. And it was a call from the hospital to let me know that the helicopter had arrived. And I remember so badly wanting to ask, "But is he alive?" and I just couldn't bring myself to ask. During that car ride, so many times as I was just processing and wondering, if I had lost my husband or if he was going to be in the same vegetative state the rest of his life that he was in when I had left him, my anxiety would start to well up in me, and a very audible voice of God would say, "Jack, I'm holding you." And right away, that wave of peace would just come over me. I knew he was holding me, and I knew wherever Jay was, he was holding Jay. And I was so thankful for those moments where God would remind me he was right there with me. Eventually, I received a phone call. Well, at that point, I made a couple phone calls. By then, my phone was blowing up as the prayer chains had started. And so I remember talking to family, and my response was, "I don't know what happened. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if Jay's alive. Thanks for your prayers. Call the next person back." That was pretty much the extent of my understanding. So at one point, the life flight nurse called. Well, actually, the nurse at the hospital called, and she happened to be a life flight nurse that got put in ER trauma that night. So thankful for her. Once we got to chatting, she told me she didn't leave Jay's side for a full 3 hours. So she's like, not even to pee. She's like, "I stayed by your husband's side, and I want you to know that." And so I was so thankful for her. And she called to say that Jay was alive but very unstable. She said they felt like Jay needed emergent hyperbaric treatment. So essentially what that is a room that they can take and increase the pressure inside the room. So there's a nurse and doctor inside, nurse and doctor outside. The ones outside are making the calls, the ones inside are doing the work. And so she said, unfortunately, our area does not have an emergent hyperbaric chamber. We want you to still continue to drive here to Mercy Hospital, but more than likely, once you get here, your husband will either be in Oklahoma or he will be in a different hospital. She said, right now we have a plane and a helicopter on standby. And so she said, more than likely your husband will be gone at one of those other hospitals, but continue to head this way. So we did. And she called me back a little bit later and said, "We're still trying to figure out a plan. Your husband is still here. Now it looks like he'll still be here as we're trying to work out with different organizations what needs to happen." So she said, when you arrive, she said, your husband had no identification on him. So when you get here, check into the emergency room, and you're going to give the name unknown iron. And so that is what he's listed at in the computer since he had no ID. So sure enough, Matt and I show up and head on into the ER, and I say my husband came in life flight, he's unknown iron, and a tech jumped up right next, sitting there at the front desk, and she's like, "We've been waiting for you." She said, "I'm going to take you back to your husband." So she immediately starts running through the emergency room there to get to Jay. So when we get to Jay, he wasn't the same Jay, but I was thankful that he was still alive. His body was still stiff for the most part at that point. He was having these weird convulsions just from his nerves being so overstimulated. At the time, he was talking about how he could start to see forms and objects and stuff. And so I remembered in his humor, I remember leaning close to talk to him so he could see me, or at least see some form of me. And at one point, he's like, "Jack, I'm blind, not deaf." Well, sure enough, as the closer I got to him, the louder I would get to, try to convey what I was telling to him. So he's like, "Tone it down, not deaf, just blind." So at that point, shortly after arriving, a doctor pulled me out of the room. And he was the doctor taking care of Jay, and he's like, "You would not believe how many people I have spoken to about your husband's situation." He's like, "There's an organization that is a very well-known organization, a diving network, that we've been on the phone with trying to figure out what we need to do here." He's like, "I'll be honest and tell you this is out of my league." And so he said, the situation right now, the decision that needs to be made is, he's like, "We think your husband needs an emergent hyperbaric chamber. Essentially, we are worried that he needs to be intubated. He couldn't be intubated, meaning a tube into his mouth to help him breathe. He can't have that in a regular hyperbaric chamber." So he's like, a decision needs to be made if, he's like, the problem arises is that your husband needs to go, like his body needs more pressure, not less. And when you go up in an airplane or up in a helicopter, the atmosphere has less atmospheric pressure. So he said the problem arises is that we are going to have to fly your husband the best thing is to get him somewhere quick. So we need to fly your husband in a plane or a helicopter. He's like, I've already been talking to air control, or my team's been talking to air control about how low can we keep the plane or helicopter safely, because he said, if your husband's body can make that flight. And then he stopped and he said it again. If your husband's body can make that flight. Because the higher up you go, the more likely it would be hard on his breathing and he could die. So he's like, but once we get him there, if he's still alive, then he has the best chance of success there with that emergent hyperbaric chamber. He said the other scenario is right here in Springfield, Missouri, is a different hospital has a hyperbaric chamber, but it's just a regular one. And so he said, right now your husband's really unstable, but if he gets a little more stable, we can put him in that hyperbaric chamber. But the only thing is, he said, once that gets up in pressure, it takes 10 minutes to come down. So if anything happens to where he needs life-saving measures and that can't happen within 10 minutes, he's like, your husband will die. He's like, so what do you want to do? I told him, I don't want to be the one to make that decision. I don't want that weight. And I started to cry. And he said, okay, he said, well, your husband has shown some slight improvement. So how about we give it a little more time and we see if an answer comes? So I remember him leaving, and I immediately called my mom. And she said, Jack, what do we pray? And I said, I don't know. I don't know what answer. Which path is the best path? I said, so at this time, all I can ask is to pray God's will be done. And so, in time, thankfully, God gave us our answer.
So in that ER, I was there about 8 hours. Obviously, lots of phone calls, plans made, changed. I did improve. I feel like that's an answer to prayer and God's mercy. So eventually, then that local hospital said they didn't want to take me. They said they don't want that responsibility. They didn't want to take me, but eventually they said they would. As long as I would be monitored in the ICU for up to 8 hours before I would get any of that treatment. So that was the plan, and the answer to the prayer was, no, we're not going to go into a plane or a helicopter. You can stay here locally. But I had to be in that, just in ICU so they could monitor it before putting in that chamber.
So yeah, he got transferred at 1:30 at night, in the middle of the night, there to Cox Hospital. And so thankfully, even though visiting hours were done, under the circumstances, the nursing staff allowed Matt and I to stay with Jay for 1 hour until 2:30. So then at that point, we each headed to our respective hotel rooms. And I remember about 3:30 in the morning seeing an unknown phone call come through on my phone, and my heart just sank. And I remember saying a quick prayer, and I answered it, and it was Jay's nurse. And she said, I have two things. She said, one, basically we're watching some cardiac isoenzymes, some heart numbers, and his are trending up. So she's like, it's not looking good. His body's been under lots of stress. So she's like, I'm not even sure if we're going to be able to do the hyperbaric chamber in the morning. So we really need those numbers to start to go down. So she's like, I just want to give you a heads up that things might not be moving as quick as you hoped for in the morning. And she said, second, she said, your husband is refusing to go to sleep until he knows that you're okay. So my husband, who is fighting for every breath, every ounce to live still at this point, wanted to make sure that I was safely tucked away in my hotel room. That teens, don't offend you, teens is true love. And so I was able to tell her, yes, I am in my hotel room, all is well. Please tell him to get a good night's sleep, as I know that that's what his body needs. So Monday morning, 7 a.m. came, and he was seen by the hyperbaric doctor. He had wanted him in the chamber by 8:30, but he said with those numbers still on the rise, we had to wait for labs to come back. So finally at 10:30, we got the great news that now his third or fourth set of cardiac labs were trending down, and they felt safe enough to be able to put Jay into the hyperbaric chamber. And so one of the things that our boys are so jealous of is that Jay got an additional ambulance ride because the hyperbaric treatment center was off campus. So Jay got to take an ambulance ride to and from his hyperbaric chambers. So about 11:15, he left for his first round of that. So, oh yeah.
So this is a picture of a hyperbaric chamber, essentially, that I'm going into. So essentially, instead of being that whole room that's full of, that they can pressurize, they stick me in this tube, and that's why once I'm in there, they pump 100% oxygen in there, and then I'm going to be in there for about a 2.5 hour treatment. So that's why once that's full, you have to let all that oxygen dissipate. Otherwise, there's a spark. If they would try to open it, if something was wrong with me, they can't just rip it open. If there's a spark, it would just explode. So that's a picture of, I went in that tube for about 2.5 hours. And what the idea is, they're trying to push the nitrogen out of my body. So when you scuba dive, nitrogen gets into your body. It usually comes out on its own. But this idea is to help force it out. So after that first treatment, I was still very weak. I still couldn't really move very well. My joints hurt. I just kind of ached. I still felt really heavy, like my body just wanted to sink into the bed. I still had these body spasms where all of a sudden I would just, shake and kind of scare everybody, but it didn't hurt or anything. It was just kind of a little bit different. One celebration, and this is kind of just for a perspective, is one celebration was I was able to hold and sip a glass of water, which sometimes maybe we take for granted, but that was a big feat at that point. So looking back at the situation, this arterial gas embolism is what they think what happened for me. But ideally, I would have been in that hyperbaric chamber within about 2 hours of the incident, and then I would have stayed in that tube for about 5 hours. So instead, I ended up, it was about 20 hours later, and I was in that, they just did the kind of a shorter treatment of 2.5 hours, and then the hope was to do another 2.5 hours later. It's not ideal, but they have to deal with what they had. They didn't want to stick me in there if I wasn't going to be stable.
So at this point, he's had one treatment. My sister happened to come from Missouri to stay with us at that point, and I was so thankful. Previous to this, I'd been running on adrenaline, little sleep. My nurse brain through that adrenaline was working, but by Monday morning, I was crashing. And so I was so thankful for her to come with her medical knowledge, and she was able to take over, and I could just now be caregiver instead of trying to do both roles. And so I remember when she got there, she asked me, she's like, "Jack, why didn't you tell us he was this bad?" And I remember telling her, because I don't want this to be my reality. And he headed off then that evening for his second treatment. And so previous to when he left, I had wiped every tear. I mean, he could kind of move his arms a little, not really even his legs, but I had, taken care of everything that he needed, like such as getting a drink of water and stuff. So I remember asking, visiting hours were over, and I remember asking the nurse, "Can I please stay till after his second treatment, till he comes back from his second treatment?" And her response is, "Well, I'll just have him call you when he's back." And I remember telling her, "Well, that would be nice, but he can't even move his arm. So, I don't think he's going to be able to call very well. So can I please just stay here until he gets back?" So reluctantly, she agreed. And so when he came back from the second treatment, I remember sitting there in his room waiting for him, and I hear the EMT ask Jay, "Are you going to transfer yourself to the bed, or do you want us to transfer you?" And he said, "I'll do it." And I remember whipping around, being like, whoa, he couldn't even raise an arm, and now he's going to transfer himself. And sure enough, that second treatment was immensely beneficial. We really saw a lot of gain after that, and he was able to scooch himself, which was a huge victory from, the stretcher to the bed.
So yeah, that was that second treatment. That was Tuesday, and by Wednesday, right?
That was on Monday. Both treatments were Monday. Sorry, yeah. So then by Tuesday, the question was, does Jay need additional treatments? We had been talking with some doctors back home over the phone that evening and kind of doing some research online about what questions we want to ask the doctor. And it was really neat to see at 6:45 in the morning, we were there when he arrived, and he started doing his neurological checklist with Jay, and I was sitting there silently checking off my sheet of things I wanted him to look at, or things questions I had. And it was neat to see that he covered everything that I was hoping he would cover. And so at that point, he felt like Jay had gained such grounds with that second treatment that he just wanted to give it some time. This still was not his expertise, anything anything diving related. He was a hyperbaric doctor, but not related to this. It was more wound care. And so at that time, they decided to do a PT evaluation to see if Jay could walk. So that was another victory celebrated, to see him shuffle through with his entourage of doctors and the next doctor that was going to take him over once he was transferred down a step, and PT and his nurse. And so that was another victory celebrated. So then he did still have a lot of neurological effects, such as the shakes and different things, but they had told us that his brain was just going to need to kind of gain some new pathways. Things just needed time to kind of settle out, and that they were hoping some of those things would resolve itself with time. So Tuesday night, he was able to get transferred out of ICU and down, and they started speaking of discharge tomorrow. So Wednesday morning, I remember being unable to sleep, and I was very unsettled because I felt like we had made great progress, yes. God had answered many prayers, yes, but I still didn't have the answers that this nurse brain needed. I still had so many questions of why. And so I remember the network that the doctors had been using was called the Diver Alert Network, also known as DAN. So if any of you scuba divers are out there, I would highly recommend getting a membership to. They were very helpful to us, but basically their job is, if you have an emergent situation related to scuba diving, you call them and they will send the Coast Guard out to rescue you. They know all the hospitals with the treatment centers. They know which ones have emergent rooms. So they're super helpful, very knowledgeable. So I remember deciding to give them a call. I had been told that they would only speak to a doctor, but I figured it was worth a shot. And so I ended up making that phone call, and before calling, on this little pad of paper, I still keep it, it says Cox Plaza Hotel. I was able to stay at the hotel that was attached to the hospital, and I made a list of all of his symptoms that he had had at the start of his onset. And so I remember calling and kind of briefly explaining my situation, and the lady on the phone said, well, it sounds like your husband has already had treatment. That's not how we're supposed to be utilized. We're to get people to treatment. So she said, it sounds like your husband is already being taken care of, and she tried to hang up on me. She tried to hang up on me many times, but I just kept talking. I'm a fast talker. So I started rattling off his symptoms, literally staring at this piece of paper right in front of me, and I said, these were his symptoms when he started, and I started, one by one checking them off. And then there came the, wait, can you tell me your husband's story? So, total shift. So, 45 minutes later, I finally had the answers I was looking for. Her and I started chatting, and she said, I know exactly what happened. So, in decompression illness, you have decompression sickness over this side, and when you get decompression sickness, meaning when you're scuba diving and you're, doesn't go okay, you either need treatment or you don't. So there's kind of two branches there. Sometimes you can get what's called the bends and you can get better on your own, and sometimes you can't. And she said on the other side of decompression illness, under the same umbrella, is called a arterial gas embolism. Thank you. So arterial gas embolism, and she said this is extremely, extremely rare. I wish I would have counted how many times she said it's extremely, extremely rare. So much so that I went home and looked in my textbook, because I was like, we didn't even learn about this, when we did all of our classes. It wasn't even there. So over on this other side, she said arterial gas embolism. She said it's extremely, extremely rare. She's like, we would think that maybe it happens in one in every 100,000 dives, and it happened to your husband. And she said the reason it's not talked about super often is because more times than not, the end result is death. So she said we don't have a whole lot of information about arterial gas embolisms, and she's like, and your husband is alive. And so she's like, can we follow Jay's case? I'm like, yes, absolutely. And so over the next couple months, it was so neat to be able to talk with them and gain information together. And it was so neat to see that they had actually called about Jay, and so there was already a chart on Jay from when the doctor, so we were able to pull all this information together from when I called and when the doctors had called, and they made a case file of a living arterial gas embolism patient. So yeah, when she told us that, when she told me that she knew his diagnosis, she said to me, when you started listing his symptoms, I had the check sheet, and she said, I checked all of the boxes for arterial gas embolism to the extreme level, except for death. So she's like, that's how severe your husband's case is. So, so another question I had for them is, I said, they're expecting to discharge my husband today. I said, if the discharge doctor is willing, are you okay with that doctor calling your network and talking to one of your physicians to make sure everything has been done on our end to safely send him home? And they were very willing. So I remember at that point, my mom and dad had come, and I remember it was my dad and I and Jay. I remember just running to Jay's room, so excited to tell him that finally something was starting to make sense. And so my dad and Jay and I remember huddling in a prayer, and the prayer was just that the doctor would be humble enough to, be willing to make this phone call to take, the advice of the Diver Alert Network. And he was such a great doctor. He was more than willing. He's like, yes, absolutely. I'm excited to learn through this situation. And so he was able to call, and he stood at Jay's chart, and the Diver Alert Network would tell them, have you run these tests, done these labs? They went through Jay's chart, and both sides determined that Jay was well enough to be able to go home at this point.
So on Wednesday, I was able to be discharged. I was weak, but I was able to be discharged, and Jackie had been staying. There were some rooms attached to the hospital that she could stay in, so I was able to get wheeled over there and essentially to check out, and we headed home. And I just thought it was interesting here. It's only a couple days later, and I'm walking out of the hospital, and I don't have any medication I'm going to be taking. I don't have any casts on or anything. I'm just weak, and we'll progress from there. But such a drastic change in that short amount of time. And so we attribute a lot of that to prayer. Like Jackie said, people at the marina that didn't even know us were praying. People around here were praying. All over were praying for us, and so we're thankful for that. So we got out, and we ended up, she drove all the way home, which is about 6.5 hours for us to get home. And so we were just, I don't know, we're appreciative of all the prayers. It's very humbling to be on that receiving end. But it was encouraging at the same point to see the body of Christ come around us, and to see all the people that took care of me and took care of Jackie. Our family came, as Jackie mentioned. My family, my mom and dad were watching our boys, and so they kind of, I'm sure they would have wanted to come down to the hospital, but obviously our boys needed them to stay home. And, they did know something was going on, but like Jackie said, they were maybe a little more jealous about the helicopter rides and ambulance rides, so maybe didn't quite know the severity, which was fine. They needed that stability to be at home. So, but we're just very appreciative for all the prayers then and the network of prayers that were offered on our behalf.
Yeah, a story that ties in, and sorry, we're almost done, I'm watching the time. A story that ties into that network is previous on the houseboat, like you're literally stuck there with everyone and not much to do. So a lot of sitting around and talking in between dives. And I was talking to one of the gentlemen, and he asked how Jay and I met. And so through that story, I brought up our church. And so he asked me, he said, his question to me was, what is the one thing you love most about your church? And so I remember telling him, I really love that they preach truth. And I said, you didn't ask for a second, but I'm going to give you a second one because I find it so special. But I said, the second thing I love most about our church is the network. And he's like, well, what do you mean about the network? And so I said, I explained how Roanoke at that time, 3 summers ago, had 2 tragic deaths, an electrocution death of a young man and then a car accident of a young man. So we were just coming off the heels of that tragedy. Our church was, both of them were from church. And so I explained to him that our church body as a whole was praying for Roanoke. Those that had heard through the grapevine were praying from Roanoke. So he kind of looked at me with a squinted face like, huh? And so I just explained, I said, well, just a story personally, I said, I heard about a tragedy out in Ohio of a young boy dying. And I said, I don't know the family, but I said, we've been praying for them. And I said, right now there's a visitation and funeral going to be happening this weekend of a young man who's passed away, who left a wife and young kids. And so I said, I'm praying for their family. I don't know them that well, but I'm praying for them too. And so that kind of ended, and to me that, we were done with that conversation. So fast forward then a couple days later, and then on Sunday a day later, then on Sunday when he was part of the group that took my belongings out to the car, and right before we loaded in to go, he turned to look at me and he said, it looks like you and your husband are going to be on the receiving ends of those prayers. And I hadn't even fathomed that yet. I was thinking Taylor Church, Roanoke Church, those prayer chains, but I did not even fathom the global body that we have. Young kids, we have an immensely special denomination. There's a lot of great Bible-believing denominations out there, but ours is immensely special, I believe, because my life has been touched by the global church. And so it would just fascinate me that Jay and I, we would go out to eat, and we would see a Goodfield, Illinois couple there, and they would say, we've been praying for you. Or I'd go to the chiropractor, and someone from Washington Church, we've been praying for you. Or one day I was sitting in Taylor Church next to my mom, and a lady came up to me, and she said, I would have not known who you were had you not been sitting by your mother, but I want you to know that at the time of Jay's accident, your sister was with my daughter, and at the time she got the phone call, so she called me, and we were at the Detroit church gathering at the elder's house having a singing, and she said, we as a Detroit church got together and prayed. I've heard of people from Bay City, Michigan, starting prayer chains for Jay that never even knew us. And so it's just neat to see how special that is. And that day, when I went down to rescue Jay, it was a rescue mission. And just on my heart right now is who has come to rescue. There was a time in my life where I needed rescued. I was drowning, metaphorically speaking, drowning. And who came to rescue me many, many, many years ago? Who died for me so that I could have life? Jesus. Yes, Jesus. Jesus came to rescue me, just like I got to rescue Jay that day, but on a much different, much larger scale, Jesus has come to rescue each one of us. And so had the water not been visible, or had I just not been worried about Jay not coming up, because I had always come up, faster anyway, so had I not worried about it, or I couldn't see him, or I didn't know what was going on, that day, that rescue mission would have been a recovery mission. Recovering a dead body, that would have been the goal of that day had I not went down to rescue him. So don't let life just pass you by thinking you have all the time in the world where someday you become a recovery. Does that make sense? Jesus came to rescue you. He did the work so that you might have eternal life. So with our theme verse, everything that has breath, what do? Praise the Lord. Yes, we're so thankful that God gave Jay the breath so that he could continue to praise Jesus and that his story could hopefully glorify him.
I'll give you this right now. Wow. God is good. We are thankful for their willingness to come here tonight to share with us their story of God's faithfulness and how he has taken them, just like all of us, from a grave to life. That can be our story, each of us. We don't know what's going to happen today. We don't know what's going to happen tonight. Hopefully we all make it safely to the high school, but we are not guaranteed tomorrow. We are not guaranteed our next breath. And so it is important to have Jesus in your corner, living in your heart, and having that hope of heaven. So that is our prayer for each of you, that thought can be stirred in your heart and in your mind, and that you guys can know what to do with that when Jesus is calling you. We will now kind of shift gears a little bit, and we will be transitioning to the high school for some games and activities and kind of volleyball, basketball, basically free time for you guys. How we will do that is you guys will be transported in the vehicles of how you got here. If there are anyone that was dropped off, I know of a couple situations where like a couple indie kids were maybe dropped off, let us know and we'll make sure that we have transportation to get you there. For Bluffton kids, your toaster oven is back out there. I don't know if it's fixed or not. But you guys got here, you guys got here a little bit late, and so t-shirts were not handed out to Bluffton and Bluffton North. We will get those to you guys now as you're getting on the bus. Just hang on to those, and then when we get to the school, everyone is going to unload their luggage and take it into the school, because at the end of the evening, we will announce accommodations, and so luggage will be going with you to your host tonight. That's where you will be staying. So we will break here now. You guys can head out. Just if you need to use the restroom, try to do that quickly, and then we'll board vehicles and be going to Harrison.